Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. Joined as always by Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders. I'm Matt Manocherian of Sports Info Solutions. Aaron, I am excited to talk some football today and to get on the field. How about you?
I am too. There are some really good games this week, some exciting games, some games that we never would have expected before the season would be important. Like, I don't think anybody thought that Patriots at Jets in week 6 would be greatly important, or
the division-leading
Jets,
Jets.
Jaguars.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, the division-leading Jets. That's correct.
Meanwhile, the Giants sitting there at 0-5, and they have even fewer wide receivers than they do wins.
Right.
So a tale of two cities there in New York.
They're not going to the playoffs, though. Yeah,
Safe
I don't
to
think
say.
the Giants are going to the playoffs.
I think that's safe to say. We have pretty good numbers on that. Nobody's ever made the playoffs at 0-5, I believe.
And the other thing about this week is that, we're so used to these boring Thursday night matchups, and it starts with a really good Thursday night matchup, the Eagles and Panthers, because, those are two teams that look really good right now. The Panthers are not as high in the Football Outsiders numbers as their record would indicate, but certainly the last 2 weeks they've looked good. And then the Eagles are just looking really good right now.
Yeah, the Eagles are looking outstanding, and that's actually where I wanted to start the talking today. Carson Wentz, he has been absolutely insane on third down. So check out some of Carson Wentz's third down numbers. He's number one in the NFL in completions. Yards, he has 574, and number 2 is Josh McCown with just 238, less than half. He leads the league in air yards, again by over 100 yards, touchdowns, and yards per attempt at 11 yards per attempt. On third downs, we're talking. He's thrown 6 third down touchdowns to just 1 interception, and he's completed 70% of his passes. Carson Wentz on third down has been absolutely out of his mind. What do we make of that, Aaron?
I think it's great. It's great news, particularly for those of us who have argued for years now to stop judging players on their rookie years as if nobody ever develops. Because while Carson Wentz's rookie performance was absolutely overrated by a lot of members of the football commentariat, we also went into this year knowing that guys improve in their second season. Right? Like everything that Scott Kazmar said about Wentz throwing short and Wentz not being anywhere near as good as Eagles fans thought last year was accurate. But at the same time, that's a rookie, and guys develop. And what we've seen is young quarterbacks develop. And Wentz is playing much better this year, and he's throwing downfield much more this year. It suggests that the problems throwing downfield last year were related to the receivers that he had and the way that they had the Eagles offense structured, not that Wentz couldn't throw downfield.
Right.
The third down thing is really remarkable. DVOA shows it too, right? Third and fourth down, the Eagles, number 1 in DVOA, 99.7% above average. The next best team is the Rams, 49.5%. So essentially on third downs, the Eagles have been twice as good as any other offense.
That is... you sum it up right there. 99.7% DVOA. That's got to be as well as anybody's ever played on a third down split in any season. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that would probably be I don't know for sure, but that would probably be a record for a full season. Now, of course, they're not going to be that good for the full season.
Right.
But that's still pretty darn good even for a 5-week period, any 5-week period. That's excellent.
Yeah, it's interesting. Everybody wants to be good on third down, and you spend so much time practicing third down, doing your specific situational stuff. But then to actually have that much success, it makes you wonder, okay, they're probably pretty good on third down, and we can expect them to be pretty good going forward for the rest of the year. But how much of that is small sample size and just some good luck that might turn around on them? I'll be fascinated to see if they can continue that productivity all year.
Twice as good as every other offense, that's small sample size. Being very good, that's not probably small sample size. They're likely to be very good on third down all year. If they're this good in a 5-game sample, they're just not going to be this good all year. But again, it's a lot of young quarterbacks. We talk about this era of the quarterback in the NFL that's ending, right? Brady and Breeze are still playing out of this world at their ages, but a lot of the other older quarterbacks are declining. Rivers, Manning, Roethlisberger, obviously. And we're like, oh, are there young quarterbacks who are going to take up the slack? Well, guess what? There are, right? I mean, Prescott, for all that he's had his issues, like against Denver, they're Denver, he was fabulous against Green Bay, even though Dallas eventually lost. Of course, what Goff has done this year with amazing year 1 to year 2 turnaround, and Wentz playing very, very well in his second year. And when you add that into certainly Deshaun Watson looking good so far, and the raw talent that, we haven't seen the actual performance yet, but the raw talent of like Trubisky and Mahomes, and I don't think that we're never going to see another group of good quarterbacks. I think we've got some good young quarterbacks to replace the older ones who have all gotten really old.
Yeah, for me, the difficulty is going to be finding offensive linemen because of the way that offensive linemen really just don't run block in college right now, so you don't get that development. But as far as the quarterbacks go, I mean, with all the 7-on-7 leagues going on, and all the emphasis on the passing game, I think we're going to continue to see really good quarterbacks come along. And for all the things that maybe hurt the health of the game in the long term, I think one of the real positive things is the quarterbacks that will be developed. I'm with
you 100%, definitely.
One other thing I wanted to bring up, because you were talking about the jump from year 1 to year 2 and how your first year is not your whole career. And actually, from a scouting perspective, one thing that when we put in our grades on players, we don't actually grade them saying this is what they're going to be on day 1 when they come in our building. When you're grading somebody, yes, you're evaluating what they've done, but you're also projecting what they can become. And kind of the holistic grade, kind of the holy grail number that you end up putting, you'll put numbers on, say it's a running back, their speed, their agility, their hands, pass blocking, all sorts of different stuff. But when you look into the final number 1, what grade are you going to put on him? What you're doing is you're projecting what they're going to be in their second year, because that's actually what you're saying. What can he become with a year of development, with a year in our system and a year with our coaches? What can he be for our team? And what you're actually looking at is what they're going to be in year 2 and year 1. So just that kind of structure around scouting certainly supports your principle that don't judge these guys on year 1. That is not a finished product NFL player.
Yep. I mean, it's not just quarterbacks. Another name I'll say, Vic Beasley.
Yeah.
People thought he was a wash after year 1. Year 2 comes out as 9,000 sacks. I mean, he wasn't as good as his sack number because he had a really odd sacks to hurries ratio, but he's a pretty good player, and you don't write guys off after 1 year.
That's an interesting thing we need to look further into at some point, is the guys that are high sack to pressure guys are the guys that are low sack to pressure guys. Olivier Vernon reminds me of the other type of guy, a guy who's always getting pressures but can't seem to finish the sack.
All the ratios sort of suggest, going back, that in general, that ratio will regress towards the mean from year to year. If you've had a year with a lot of sacks but not as many hurries, you'll probably have fewer sacks the next year. If you have a year with lots and lots of hurries but fewer sacks, you'll probably have more sacks the next year. With the sort of caveat, I think, that once you reach a certain number of hurries, you're not going to have the same ratio of sacks just because you just don't get to the quarterback that often. I think that's kind of maybe what it is with Vernon, because he gets so many hurries that you're just not, the ratio would demand that he had like 20 sacks a year. You're just not going to do that.
Right.
Speaking of pass pressure guys, I would say, unfortunately, we're not going to get to see them all this year because of the horrible injury, for example, to J.J. Watt this week. And it's just another example of how injuries have been so awful this year and so crazy. So many of them.
Just awful.
It just seems remarkable.
Yeah, it's been really brutal. And we had talked about bringing up this topic last week. We said, let's save it. Let's see. Maybe it's just a little aberration. But this week, I went into our Sports Info Solutions injury database. And what we do for injuries is, besides just tracking who's active and who's out and who's missing practice and who's probable, questionable, and all these sort of things that the media is reporting on, we combine all of those reports with our charting. Our scouts are actually assigned to look for injuries on every play. So anytime there's any sort of an injury event that goes on beyond what would normally happen on a football play. So we're talking about anything from a guy getting carted off the field to a guy just taking an awkward hit, landing awkwardly, and he gets up and he looks fine, but the scout notices that might have been an uncomfortable situation. We're charting all of these sorts of injury events, and then also what the results of the injury are. And through 5 weeks of the season, the stats are really stark compared to 2016. In 2016, we had 236 total in-game injury events through 5 weeks. In 2017, we're up to 340, more than 100 more. Even more crazy to me is the in-game injuries. Like we said, there are different severities. When we look into guys that had injuries that caused them to leave the field, so they actually had to come off the field, either a trainer visit, a stretcher, or just they came immediately off the field. Through 5 weeks last year, there were 110 of those. This year, there have been 288, way more than twice as many. The numbers are just crazy. It's hard to put into context, and then it's another thing when you're talking about numbers, but then we also got to remember these are people. These are people doing their jobs, and these numbers, something has to be done.
And I don't know what you can do, but that is really remarkable. The causing the player to leave the field number is really remarkable. And I'll point out this is different from the Football Outsiders injury database, which is based entirely off of injury reports. So, in the database that we have that goes back to 2000, we don't mark whether an injury took place in practice or whether it took place in a game or whether it caused a guy to leave a game. So this is a sort of more intricate charting that SIS has done the last 2 years. I doubt severely, right, even though you don't have that data prior to 2016, I would doubt severely that 2016 was some kind of remarkable low number and that 2015 and 2014 were actually a lot more like this year. It certainly seems anecdotally like this year. I have never seen this many in-game injuries, and I've never seen this many where it just seems like every team in the league has lost at least one guy for the season. There are exceptions. I can't think of who Pittsburgh has lost yet for the whole season, which is kind of remarkable, right? Because that's a team that on offense, we talked about how they could never keep all their guys healthy. You look at every other team. Kansas City's dominating the league, but remember, no Eric Berry, right? For the whole year except for the first game of the season. Philadelphia, no Darren Sproles. Jacksonville, no Allen Robinson. Seattle, no Cliff Averill for the rest of the year. Houston no longer has J.J. Watt or Whitney Merciless. The Patriots have played the entire year without Julian Edelman. Every team, you look at them and you can think of a player who's been lost for the entire season to injury. It's really kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy and it's sad. That a lot of these teams you're talking about are still contenders, even with these injuries that they're dealing with. But guys just aren't on the field, and see where we can pick up next man up.
And I don't know how to solve it. I don't know how to make it better. It's a contact sport. You can't get rid of contact. The question is what to do about all of the. Is there a way to solve the non-contact injuries? Is there a way to solve the nagging hamstrings? Is there? I don't know how to make it so there are fewer injuries, but it's just a tremendous number of. I'm not even talking concussions. I'm talking broken bones, torn Achilles, torn ligaments, hamstring issues. It's just it sucks to lose so many good players.
Yeah, and then you noted anecdotally it feels like there are a lot when the anecdotal matches the analytics, which is here. I mean, 110 players leaving the field to 288 players leaving the field. There's no sort of subjectivity there. These are guys that had to come off the field because of something that happened to them. The numbers are up this year, and like you said, we don't have a historical baseline to go up, but we don't think that 2016 was a historically low year in terms of injuries. And if these numbers keep going up and we keep finding these same sort of statistics, we might need to start looking into, are the rule changes that have shortened the off-season practice time and the in-season practice time, are they having a detrimental effect? Are the new rules meant to actually protect the players? Are they actually some of the thing that's causing the defender to go low and causing what the wide receivers were afraid of in the first place, which is the lower body injuries taking a rise? The other thing is you see a lot of soft tissue injuries this year, and if you talk to any sorts of trainers out there, they will tell you that shouldn't happen. It just shouldn't. It's people not doing a good enough job when those things are happening in large numbers.
Doesn't it feel like this is anecdotal again, right? But doesn't it feel like there's more guy falls on a teammate wrong injuries than there used to be?
Yeah, we do have that split. I don't have it available right now. We split out the injuries based on whether you made contact with the ground, contact with the ball, contact with the opponent, or non-contact. I don't have those splits in
Right.
front of me right now. But
it seems like there's been more of whether it's tripping like your own player or an opponent. There's been more. That's not a non-contact injury, but it's not a like slamming into a guy injury. It's a offensive lineman backs up and trips over a guy. That's
right.
kind of what happened to J.J. Watt this week. And it seems like limbs go in ways that limbs shouldn't go, and it just feels like there are more of those than usual. Maybe, again, it's anecdotal, so you don't know. I can't tell you that this is definitely the case. It just could be faulty memory because memory has a recency bias. But, man, it just feels like there's a lot of that this year.
Yeah, it feels like a lot, and that's why if you go to any sort of practice field, all you hear the coach is saying, stay up, stay up, stay up. A big indicator of injuries is going to be people being on the ground. Guys don't tend to get injured when people are on their feet, and so you want to keep people standing up as much as possible.
All right, well, enough of this depressing stuff. Let's get back to talking about the game on the field with the players who do manage to stay healthy and the most important games of this week. The number one most important game of this week for playoff odds.
Drum roll, please.
Green Bay at Minnesota. Green Bay is in the playoffs 83% of the time if they win this game, 58% of the time if they lose. Minnesota, 53% if they win the game, 25% with a loss. Essentially, this is Minnesota's shot to jump back into the playoff race because Minnesota at 3-2 is a game behind Green Bay and tied with Detroit, but Detroit has played a little better this year. So a big win over Green Bay would put those two teams tied in win-loss, and that puts Minnesota really back into the race. If Minnesota loses, they're 2 games behind Green Bay, having lost at home to Green Bay, and then it's pretty tough, especially to win the division.
So Green Bay win, they separate themselves. If Minnesota can win, they're right back neck and neck with Green Bay. The thing that is fascinating to me here is Aaron Rodgers and the game that he had last week, the season that he's been having, the career that he's having. He is just unbelievable. And specifically, I wanted to talk about that play towards the end of the game where he was able to break contain and why that happened. So as Aaron Rodgers pointed out after the game, he was seeing a lot of man cover 2 throughout the game, and that's what he read on that play. And so that's what prompted him to try to run for it. Now, he would know what man cover 2 looks like because he's seen more of it than anybody else in the league. He's taken 31 passing attempts against man cover 2, which is more than anybody else. Now, about man coverage 2, what's going on here? So it's cover 2 over the top. You have 2 deep safeties dividing the field in half. But on top of that, every receiver underneath is being covered man to man. So you're having 4 guys rushing. This isn't a blitz scheme. But this is man coverage, often press coverage on the outside because you have those 2 deep safeties to help out. And this is overall the most effective coverage that we chart. Now, the problem with man cover 2 is it's a great coverage when you don't have to worry about the run. And most of the quarterbacks this year who've seen it the most are guys with poor running games around them. Carson Palmer, Eli Manning. And that's why the defense will just sit back. 2 deep safeties, man coverage. We don't need any eyes on the ball carrier. We're not worried about them running the ball. We'll take care of that secondarily. But there's also a weakness against a quarterback who can run. So because you're playing this man cover 2, you have 2 deep safeties. They're not going to stop the quarterback. And you have all 5 guys playing man coverage and potentially taking their eyes off the quarterback. Whereas in zone, you're going to have all kinds of eyes in the backfield. It's a great read by Aaron Rodgers when he was pressured so quickly on the play to realize it was man 2, realize that if he could pull it down and run, if he could escape from those first couple of guys, that he was going to be able to get the first down. And it's a top mental play combined with a top physical play, and I'm just in awe.
Yeah, the broken tackle in the backfield and the awareness of the sideline to get an extra 6 or 7 yards even after the first down because he was tiptoeing on that sideline but very aware of where it was to not go out of bounds. So, listen, Aaron Rodgers is not the number 1 quarterback in the game by any statistical metric this year, but I think when you look at what someone has to work with, the people around them, and the things that they do on their own, I am one of the people among many who will criticize the sort of the play calling in the Green Bay offense for often being very stagnated. But Rodgers overcomes it with his own personal qualities. And I am a believer that Aaron Rodgers is the best player in the game.
Yeah, put Aaron Rodgers on the New York Giants, and you've got the Green Bay Packers.
You've been playing the same scheme. Oh, yeah, okay. Maybe the last couple of weeks with the tackles injured. Once Bakhtiari and Balaga are healthy, it's a little bit better than that. But there's your injuries again, right? I mean, the Packers don't have a guy who's been lost for the whole season, but they have had their tackles missing so far, right? Those guys aren't out for the next 3 months, but they've missed them so far. And then if you flip it around to the other team, of course, the Vikings have had injury problems to deal with because who knows who's playing quarterback for them from week to week because Bradford is playing or not playing, and then he's playing, but he's not playing well. So then they pull him and they put in Case Keenum, and Bridgewater may come back, and a lot of us are Bridgewater believers, but we don't know what the physical condition is there. And it's a little bit of a mess that they've somehow gotten through. I mean, you got to hand it to Case Keenum in the limited amount of time that he has played. It's shocking to say this, but Case Keenum is 5th in the league in passing DYAR, and he is 2nd in passing DVOA. It screams small sample size for a backup quarterback, but as long as you don't think you're going to be depending on Case Keenum doing this all year, you'll take it.
Yeah, it's really...
Your dream is that your backup can come in and completely play over his head for like 2 or 3 weeks. That's like the backup quarterback dream.
He's having the dream backup QB scenario. It's interesting that the Packers are this team with this great quarterback, and we're not sure much about the team that they have around them. Meanwhile, the Vikings seem to have such a well-built team that it doesn't even matter who's playing quarterback for them right now. They're finding ways to have success. And it comes back to complementary football. And, you noted Keenum's stats. And when you look at his more traditional numbers, 65% completion, 77.4 yards per attempt, you kind of say, 4 touchdowns to no interceptions. That's certainly good. But the 8th fewest air yards in the league. It's not like Case Keenum has suddenly morphed into a big-armed, deep ball passer. But you notice the efficiency stats. Number 2 in the league in DVOA. It's certainly not lying. I don't know if he can continue at the level that he's played to this point. But for me, there hasn't been much of a drop-off. I'll be really interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a kind of crazy split for the Vikings, right? Because we all went into the season feeling... Everybody felt that the Vikings defense was very good, right? I even remember before the season, I believe I picked the Vikings in our preseason, the staff predictions, as the team most likely subjectively to play better than our projection had them, because our projection had their defense as kind of average. And it was like, no, come on, there's so many good, talented players on that defense. It's got to be better than that. Well, guess what? The Minnesota offense is 5th so far, and the defense is 16th. It's average, which is kind of remarkable given how many really talented players, like certain players on that defense that we know are really talented. Everson Griffin and Danielle Hunter. And Anthony Barr is playing better this year. And then especially Xavier Rhodes, who's turned into one of the top cornerbacks in the game.
Yeah, Xavier Rhodes, 147 pass snaps this year. He's been targeted 23 times, which is a relatively high rate, but just 11 completions, so less than 50%. No touchdowns, no interceptions, but 3 combined breakups. He started to do what we like to call Richard Sherman things around the office here, because as we're charting coverages, certain corners will make our jobs really difficult, because we all know the Seahawks are going to play a whole lot of cover 3, but Richard Sherman's really going to do whatever he wants out there, and it's basically going to look like he's playing man a lot of time against whoever the receiver is that he's matched up on out there, even though what they're really doing is in the context of a cover 3 scheme. Xavier Rhodes is a guy this year who's starting to get that green light from Mike Zimmer, and we're starting to see him do some Richard Sherman type things. Xavier Rhodes really has been given free rein to get up and press whenever he wants, regardless of what his responsibilities are on any given play. He works great with Harrison Smith, who obviously had a fantastic play towards the end of the game last week. Their defense is really top notch, and Xavier Rhodes has a decent argument that he might be the best corner in the NFL.
And here's the problem, though, is you need to have 2 of them. In fact, you need to have 3 of them, right? In the modern NFL, you need to have 3 good cornerbacks.
Yep.
And the Vikings have 1 stellar cornerback and one average cornerback who is amazing considering his age, Terrence Newman, but he's average, and one bad cornerback who's not starting quality, and that's Trey Waynes. And so Trey Waynes is 66th in yards allowed per target, and he's 65th with a 32% success rate in coverage. And that's a problem.
Yeah.
And so the Vikings defense is number 6 in DVOA against wide receiver 1, but 28th against wide receiver 2, and 23rd against the other wide receivers. And so where do you think Aaron Rodgers is going with the ball? You think he's going to whoever Rose is covering, or you think he's going to his other receivers, given that he's got 3 pretty good receivers? I think they'll just look. If they put Rhodes on Jordy Nelson, that's fine. Like we did a thing a year ago where we forgot about Jordy Nelson because of Sherman. We could forget about Jordy Nelson because of Rhodes and just go to Devontae Adams all day and have him kick Trey Waynes' butt. And it's tough because I'm a believer in giving cornerbacks time to develop, but this is like Waynes' 3rd year. Let's get with it already. And then there's the guy they drafted last year in the 2nd round, Mackenzie Alexander, 2nd round cornerback in his 2nd year, can't even really see the field.
Yeah,
like,
we
I
gotta
don't
get
know
on the
what
field.
that guy's deal is.
And I think one thing you're going to start seeing a lot more from the Vikings is what the Patriots have become kind of famous for over the past few years, which is they'll let Xavier Rhodes kind of man up on his own, and they'll give lots of safety help over on the other side, playing what we call cover 6, which is a quarter half scheme, and they'll leave the weaker corner with more help over the top to try to give him a little bit, even it out a little bit, and make Aaron Rodgers' life at least a little bit difficult in deciding where to put the football.
Yeah, now what's interesting is the opposite is true when you look at the Green Bay defense versus the Minnesota offense, because Green Bay so far this year is 26th in DVOA versus wide receiver 1, but 3rd against wide receiver 2. And again, here we go with the 3rd-year cornerback. When are you getting your act together already? Demarius Randall, 63rd in yards allowed per pass, 64th in success rate allowed. So basically the same as Trey Waynes, and whoever he is covering, and I'm going to guess that would be Stephon Diggs, will absolutely kill him. Meanwhile, the rookie, Kevin King, has actually been quite good, 18th in both of the charting stats that we get, and that's a big part of that discrepancy with the Green Bay defense. So for the Packers, I think you want to go to your 2nd and 3rd options and stay away from Rhodes. And with the Vikings, it's if Randall's on your first option, then go to your first option all day. Yeah,
Thielen and Diggs, whoever's your guy there, whoever's covered by the lesser corner, he's getting the ball.
Yeah. Now the 3rd team in the NFC North race is Detroit, and they are involved in the 2nd most important game of the week for playoff odds, which is Detroit at New Orleans, which has what I think is a kind of shocking 6.5-point line for the Saints, given that in DVOA, at least, these two teams are pretty much exactly equal this year. But Detroit makes the playoffs 64% of the time with a win, 36% with a loss. The Saints, 40% of the time with a win, 18% with a loss, because with a loss here, it would just put them so far behind the Falcons and Panthers, both of whom are only 1-loss teams this year. It would be really tough for the Saints to come back from that. It's a really good, interesting game, especially because the Saints defense is playing better than anybody would have expected. They're only slightly below average. The Lions defense is also playing way better than anybody would have expected. The worst defense in the league last year, 8th so far this year. I don't quite know where that's come from.
The thing that I'm looking at here is New Orleans and the way that they've been playing over the last couple of games relative to how they started the season. New Orleans started the season really looking like the same old Saints that we're used to seeing. High-powered offense, lots of throwing the ball, and the defense is Swiss cheese. It seems to me over the past couple of games, they've really taken to really trying to, use the term establish the running game. I don't think that's how Sean Payton is exactly thinking of it, but what he is doing is neutralizing the pass rush. And there's been I think a concerted effort to switch from we're going to outscore you to we're going to really be complementary with what we do here. We're not going to throw the ball too much at the risk of turning the ball over. We're going to mix in the runs. We're going to mix in the short passes. We are going to do the things that keep the chains moving and maybe keep a little bit more time of possession to keep our defense off the field. And then our defense is a little bit better than they've been in the past. And without them being on the field all the time facing 400 passes, we can actually see some more production out of them. So I thought they've really taken a noticeable change in their approach that's gone from we are going to be the same old Saints, we're going to outscore you, to if we can't make defense with our defense, we're going to make defense with our offense. And I'm very curious to see how it works out this weekend.
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer of a matchup for Detroit in some ways because the Saints defense has still been horrible against the run, 30th in DVOA. The improvement is primarily against the pass where they're 16th. But does Detroit feel like a team that's going to try to run it down your throats? No. And one of the really remarkable things with these two teams is the amazing difference in the run blocking. So the Saints are 7th in adjusted line yards. Their running backs have only been stuffed for a loss or no gain on 12% of runs so far this year. Detroit is 31st in adjusted line yards.
Wow.
And their running backs have been stuffed for a loss or no gain on 31% of runs so far this year, which is tied with the Chargers for the worst in the league. And that's, a bit of a problem, especially because, the Saints, the run defense is sort of the weakness, but if you can't run against them, what are you going to do? I think the Saints will do a little bit better than most teams have against the Detroit defense. The Detroit defense, a lot of the improvements this year has been first down, where they're both 6th against the run and against the pass on first down. But, the Saints have a good offense. They're 6th passing on first down. They're 13th running the ball. The other interesting thing here, by the way, about the Saints running backs is Detroit is 3rd in DVOA against passes to running backs, which is, of course, a really big part of the Saints offense. So that is a place where Detroit is strong in this matchup, unless the issue there is just that they're really good against backfield passes. I don't know whether that quite applies when you split Kamara out, and Kamara gets split out quite a lot.
Yeah, with Peterson gone, especially watching Kamara this week, you expect him to get some more touches. Very, very interesting to see how that unfolds. Another guy on the defense for the Saints, Marcus Latimer, their first-round pick, a guy who, when I watched coming out of Ohio State last year, reminded me a lot of Vontae Davis in the way that he played, some of his good points and some of his bad points. He's been really great so far this year. I think the Saints are really happy with what they've got.
Really good. The one Saints game I've watched was against the Patriots in week 2, and he was really good against Brandon Cooks in that game.
He doesn't seem afraid to match up against anybody. Matt Stafford. I wanted to take a look at him because he is, as we all know, the highest paid quarterback in the league with his new contract this offseason. Matt Stafford has 9 touchdowns versus 1 interception this year, but his deeper stats are a little bit concerning to me. He's 14th in the league at completion percentage, very pedestrian, 64%, and he's 26th in the league in yards per attempt at only 6.5 yards per attempt. This is the quarterbacks that he's ahead of on that list: Hoyer, Bortles, Glennon, Flacco, Cutler, and Kaiser. So not the list of the hottest quarterbacks in the league right now. So we did a little bit of analysis, and what he is doing per dollar by average annual value this season, he gets about 132 yards per $1 million that he gets paid. By comparison, we took a look at Carson Wentz. He gets 653 yards per $1 million. So in terms of bang for the buck, what we're seeing with Matt Stafford, we're sure we knew that the Detroit overpaid. They had to do what they had to do to keep their guy. But that's what you get when you make that sort of investment and you're looking into building a competitive football team all around. 132 yards per $1 million versus 653 yards for the young quarterback on his first contract.
You gotta love the artificially lower salaries from the CBA for players in their first 4 years. It's the way to build a team, right? I mean, we could have a long economic discussion here about the value and what happens when you artificially depress salaries. But it just so happens that there really is the top 2 ways to build a winning NFL team right now are to either find a good quarterback who can bring you quality performance in his first 4 or 5 years, depending on the round you draft him in, for the lower price that is set into the CBA, or to find a who marries international supermodel who makes millions of dollars more than he does, so that he can have an artificially low salary, which both of those things allow you to pay more money to players at other positions because you're paying an artificially low salary to your quarterback.
So I've
either got to find the guys that models want to marry, or draft one and get good stuff out of him in his early years.
I've actually heard on the scouting circles, some guys will say, and I'm not going to mention any names here, but they'll say, look for the quarterbacks with the pretty girlfriends. And it's, I think, just a stereotype looking back. I think it just happens to be that quarterbacks tend to get pretty girls. Shocking news there.
Right. I don't think that's an economic discussion. I think the idea behind that phrase is the quarterbacks with self-confidence on the field will have self-confidence in the other parts of their life, and therefore will attract the prettiest women. I don't think most of their pretty girlfriends double as multi-million-dollar international models.
I was going to say, yeah, I've never bought into that philosophy until just now, though, because if you can find the wife that can be a multi-million-dollar model that makes a lot more money than you, then you can beat the salary cap. Genius work by Ernie Adams there.
It's analytics, baby. It is analytics.
Is that all? Anything else you wanted to talk about Detroit and New Orleans wise?
The other thing I'll say about New Orleans, just to finish things off for the week, is: do you agree with me that the amount of digital ink spilled over Adrian Peterson's getting traded to Arizona far outweighed the actual importance of this transaction?
Yeah, he's traded for a conditional 6th-round pick. People want to spend the ink on Adrian Peterson because he's been a great player and the story that he was going over there. But yeah, this is pretty meaningless. I think he'll be a much better fit than Chris Johnson was for kind of the power back role there. There's a chance he'll get so many carries behind that terrible offensive line that he won't want to play football again next year. But yeah, the Saints had their 1st and 2nd down running back already. They have their 3rd down running back already. And both of them are outplaying Adrian Peterson. This wasn't really a shocking twist. This was, like Sean Payton said, this was a really expected thing that just made sense for everybody.
And it's what we all expected when he signed in New Orleans. None of us thought he had anything left, and it turns out he has nothing left. So what a shock. Like, running backs get old. It's a thing that happens.
So we were right about that one. We were wrong about which team out of the Jets and the Giants was going to have a chance this year.
Yeah, I'll see. I think when we get to the end of the year, with the Giants' defense should rebound a little bit, and the Jets should fall apart. I wouldn't be surprised if they had similar records by the end of the season, but those similar records that they have by the end of the season will not be what Giants fans were hoping for before the season began.
And on that note, we will sign off. Before we go, we wanted to remind you that charting data and projections are for sale on footballoutsiders.com with sports info solutions data collected by our scouts in-house. You can subscribe to us on iTunes or Stitcher by searching Off the Charts. And you can follow us on Twitter at FBOutsiders and at sportsinfo_SIS. We'll be back next week. Have a great weekend of football and enjoy what's on the field, please. We'll see you next week.